no regrets, no confusion. There'll be no pollution. I'm so thankful I've decided to change my ways.
Welcome back to the Leaving Eden podcast. Happy Pride to you, Sadie.
Happy Pride to you, Gabi, and to all of our listeners.
Yes, it is the month of June. Actually, it is not the month of June when we are recording this, but by the time you are hearing it, it will be. And June is Pride Month, and every Pride Month, we like to do LGBTQ plus themed content. So here we go. We're bringing you the goods. Today, we are starting out with a bang. We're starting out with an interview with the one and only Andrew Pledger from Surviving BJU. Fantastic podcast that you guys should all check out about what goes on at Bob Jones University. We recorded that a couple weeks ago, I think almost like a month ago, but it was a really fantastic pod.
Yeah, I've been so excited to share it with our listeners because it was such a great interview. We had such a good time with Andrew.
Easiest podcast edit I've ever had. I literally didn't have to do anything. So I liked that. But really a great person, fantastic person. Yeah, so it is Pride Month. I think we're just going to get right into it is unless we have anything else to mention. This is a little bit of a side quest, but I did hear on the latest episode of Oh No, Ross and Carrie, which is a podcast about cults, fringe science, things of that nature, weird spirituality stuff.
When they make the claims, they show up so you don't have to.
Yes, you got the tagline right. They do.
Because I've been listening to Oh No, Ross and Carrie for at least 10 years, I think.
Wow, so you were listening to them like when they were joining science, like during the time when they were doing the Scientology stuff.
Yeah, I was currently listening like in real time as they were doing the Scientology investigation. And I was like, maybe I'm in a cult.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, so major influence in my life.
Ross Blotcher from Oh No, Ross and Carrie on their episode mentioned us, and they were trying weird concoctions, like weird food and drink combinations. Ross and Carrie both tried Mountain Moo.
I'm so embarrassed, Gabi.
I'm a little embarrassed as well.
Like, these people have this massive, massive impact on my life. People I respect so much and value their contribution to my life so much. And my contribution to their lives was Mountain Moo. I feel awful.
I do have to say that, like, their reaction to Mountain Moo, I felt was very in line with my own reaction to Mountain Moo, in that it's not as bad as you think it is, but it's not good. It's not it's a very like medium experience.
Mindy St. Clair probably drinks Mountain Moo in the medium place.
It has it has the calories to get you through the day, and it's milk, so it has like protein and it has nutrients in it, but it's not enjoyable. Anyway, I want to get to our interview with Andrew Pledger. Before we get into that, the Leaving Eden podcast is the podcast about my BFF and co-host, cult expert, cult survivor, Sadie Carpenter, her life in and escape from the independent fundamental Baptist cult, the cult in which she was raised. We talk about this cult. We talk about other cults. We talk about religion. We talk about fundamentalism. We talk about the real and present threat that cults and cult ideologies pose to society as a whole. And it is our goal to promote freedom of mind, freedom of thought, and freedom of religion. So if you like our show, if you are a fan of our show, then you can do a number of things. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/Leaving Eden Podcast, where you get access to extended, uncensored, ad-free versions of most of our episodes. And they come out a couple of days early. So you, if you don't want to wait until Monday for the episode to come out, then you can listen to it on over the weekend if you subscribe to our Patreon, and that's where you'll find that, patreon.com/Leaving Eden Podcast. You can join our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Eden Exodus, and our subreddit, reddit.com/r/Eden Exodus. Both of those are fantastic places to have discussion about the podcast, about stuff that you hear us talk about on the show. Share your stories, share memes about religion. It's a great place for a casual hang, and it's a great place for a more serious conversation as well. We have new Pride themed merch available, and this year it is Dinah Housefire themed merch.
I am so thrilled. I am about to go order 12 shirts. I don't know.
Yeah, you'll be hitting the gym in all Dinah Housefire shirts.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I get like a merch shirt or like that's what ends up happening with me. You know, it ends up being my gym apparel. If you want a Dinah Housefire shower curtain, if you want a Dinah Housefire bath towel, if you want a Dinah Housefire magnet or sticker or anything else, what have you, then those are also available. Yeah, and all of the proceeds for that we're donating the proceeds from our any Pride themed merch, so the Dinah Housefire stuff, and also like the any stuff with the rainbow flag on it, any stuff with our Love is Love shirt, all of the Pride.
This month's new Pride stuff and all former Pride stuff from previous years.
But the proceeds from all of that merch goes to Point of Pride, which is an organization, which is a charity that helps provide health care to trans people, and they're especially focused in states where trans rights and trans healthcare is under attack. Very important cause.
I love donating to Point of Pride because they are direct. They give direct grants and direct gifts financially to individual people that need gender affirming care or surgery or clothing or whatever it is that they need. And I really love that they do a bunch of micro grants for less expensive things, as well as fully funding 100% gender affirmation surgery for several recipients every year.
Yeah, and just having like talked to people who I know who are trans, it's just like if there's so many times in just any person's life when if they had a little more money for something in particular, then that would have helped them go a long way. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what that organization does, and that's something that we support. And I guess now it's time for us to thank our patrons. Our I Gave It All Tier patrons. Your names are Kathleen Moncrief, I'm Not 1010, Melissa Manown, Melora King, and Todd Dale on behalf of his wonderful Deconstructorenex of a Spouse, Madeline Antrim. Thank you guys so much for contributing at the I Gave It All tier of our Patreon.
Yes, thank you so much to the I Gave It All patrons.
Our Faith Promise Missions tier patrons, your names are Alex P., Allie Allen, Autumn of Our Discontent, Brittany, Chrissa Walker, Dora J., Eleanor Donahue, Hannah Ross, Hannah Montana, Hope Norum, Horton Here's a Shane, Janine Collin, Jana Connor, Jay Nichols, Jen Kaharski, Jessica Tambo, Jonna, Junie B. Jones, and the B stands for Babadook. Oh my God, Babadook. I have a story about Babadook, but I won't tell that right now. Kat Henwood, Kay Terwee, Kristen Marie, Linda Morgan, Madeline Antrim, Madeline Cusick, Maddie the Seventh Day Badventist, Marlena Stuve, Mary Martin, Megan Arendt, Morgan, Rob the Methodist, Stephanie Johnson, Steve and Amy, Susie, Tara McNamara, Wes the Cowboy, and Zoe Shuck. Thank you guys so much for contributing at the Faith Promise Missions tier of our Patreon. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks to the I Gave It All tier and Faith Promise Missions tier patrons, to everybody who supports us over on Patreon at any amount, and to everybody who supports us in non-financial ways, like recommending us to friends and family, being active on our social media, sharing us on social media, giving us positive reviews, subscribing on whatever podcast platform you use. All of those things help us so much, and we are incredibly thankful.
Do you want to just do the TW and then we will be right on our way?
Sure thing. In general, we talk about a lot of potentially triggering topics on our show, including but not limited to suicide and mental health, racism, misogyny, PTSD and PTSD symptoms, child abuse, mental, physical, and sexual abuse, and spiritual abuse, including guilt, shame, and fear. In most episodes, we will mention at least a few of these topics, but we try to avoid any graphic detail unless it's relevant to the story that we're telling. And we do our best to give the audience a heads up before we get into that kind of detail if we do feel it's necessary for an episode. This episode in particular does contain a lot of talk about mental health and suicidality, and also a lot of talk about homophobia within evangelical Christianity.
We are here with our guest, Andrew Pledger. Andrew has a podcast about surviving Bob Jones University. And so I want to say thank you to Andrew Pledger for coming on our show, and thank you for doing your show that you do.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I'm really happy to be able to help other survivors through giving them that safe space. But yeah, thank you for having me on y'all's show.
Yeah.
We're so glad that you're here with us.
Why don't we just run down kind of the fundy basics? So where and what timeline about are you growing up in fundamentalism?
Yeah, so I was born in 2000.
You're so young.
I know. I get that a lot. I know.
Yeah.
I'm a baby. My parents graduated from Hyles-Anderson in the late 80s, early 90s. That's where.
So they were there with my parents.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yes, they were.
I bet they knew each other.
I bet they did.
My dad graduated in 93.
Oh, interesting. Okay, got you. Yeah, so my parents, they met at Hyles-Anderson. My dad just absolutely loved, I say loved in past tense. I don't know if he still does. I think he does. I don't want to speak for him. But growing up, no one ever talked about Jack Hyles. But there was a huge case of all of his cassette, not all, but a lot of his cassette tapes in my garage. And so he was a name I saw growing up, and I had no idea really who he was until I talked to my mom. She's like, oh yeah, he was the pastor of our church, with the college we attended, First Baptist of Hammond, Indiana. And I just thought, it was a normal church. And I thought the church that I grew up in was normal because it's all I knew. But yeah, I was raised in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, in Gospelite Baptist Church, and it's located in Walkertown, North Carolina. It was pastored by Brother Bobby Robertson for, I think, at least 60 years. So Jack Hyles, I recently saw a sermon. He called him a good friend. And I accidentally stumbled across a sermon that Jack Hyles of him in my church, from the 80s. So it was very jarring to see that. And I was homeschooled my entire life with the purpose of indoctrination. And, I grew up very isolated, very scared of the outside world, indoctrinated with so much fear, so much pressure to follow all these rules. There was one way to be a Christian and there was everything else. And I struggled a lot with anxiety growing up and, discovering and my own sexuality in that environment and the confusion about it. Because once you get saved in that environment, it's like you lose all your individuality, you give up all your dreams, and you're just going to commit yourself to this group the rest of your life. And that's your only purpose. And you're going to look, think, feel, act the same exact way. And any difference in you is seen as satanic or demonic or of Satan, and a sign that you're not saved. So a lot of very legalistic tendencies and fear-based teachings, and y'all have talked about it a lot on the show, just the horrific, horrible sermons and just the mental torture, I feel like.
It is. Okay, so I'm hearing theologically, it was the kind of IFB that is once saved, always saved. If you've said the prayer, then you're saved. You don't have to worry about it. But if you still have a desire to sin, are you sure that you're saved? That is one of the worst teachings of fundamentalism for children, in my opinion. And I actually just got diagnosed with OCD a few months ago. And my psychiatrist feels that it's because of teachings like that.
Yes. And I struggled a lot with OCD tendencies growing up. I would constantly pray if there was any sinful thought. And I'm putting these things in air quotes. I would pray that God, I'm like, God, please don't kill me. Please don't kill me. Please don't kill me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Forgive me for like trying to like re-clean my slate with God to restore that relationship, because they told you if you sin, that connection is broken. And I'm like, oh, well, we're always sinning, so our connection is always broken. So I always have to pray to reconnect that relationship with God. So it was just,
I did that as a kid. Yeah, the IFB is not a good place for smart and literal children. It's not a good place for any children, but especially kids who are verbally advanced and understand the words that are being said to them while they are still young enough to be very black and white and literal. It's a recipe for disaster.
yes. And I took it so literally, and we were taught to. And another memory that has been like re-triggered for me are Chick tracts.
Ooh.
Yes,
Yeah, let's go.
so I had to be careful with the details because of legal things, but I was asked to give a testimony in a case involving IFB, and they were asked, were you exposed to Chick tracts? And once they showed me pictures of these things, I was like, my mind came back to me going in our church's, air quotes, church bookstore, and like they would have them for free. And I read every single one of those things over and over and over of a period of several years, probably like from 8 to 12. All of them.
Yeah, those were goosebumps for IFB kids.
Were
Yeah.
you exposed to Chick tracts as a child? You may be entitled to monetary compensation.
If we were entitled to monetary compensation, I don't know if we'd have the podcasts.
So you were getting a lot of Chick tracts. What homeschooling curriculum were you using?
Yeah, so I grew up mainly on Abeka from the good old Pensacola
I'm sorry.
Christian College. Yeah, thank you. And when I got older, my mom did branch out into other curriculums because she realized, oh, I can't teach my children everything. So like, I know we did teaching textbooks for math, so like lectures, because she couldn't teach us that, which I understand. But yeah, it was mainly Abeka, and then I think we started to use Apologia for science. But yeah, Abeka, that was the main thing. And I've just started to recently look back on that because homeschooling is not something I've talked a lot about online or even in interviews, because you know, I do have mixed memories with it. There are a lot of great memories in homeschooling, but there are also a lot of bad memories too. And I'm trying to learn to try to hold both of them together. And it's so hard. Mm-hmm. It's so hard to do.
When you say your mom realized she couldn't teach you everything and used a different curriculum, that already puts her ahead of the pack for fundamentalist homeschool moms. That already tells me, oh, she likely did a better job than a lot of people do. Yeah,
I mean, I would say yes. Like she did her best with that, and I do struggle a lot with shame from educational neglect in some areas. I think it's just a homeschooler thing, struggle in general. But yeah, I think she did do her best, and like I don't hold that against her at all.
That is such a crucial part of healing. It's my parents did their best, and their best was still harmful. Their best was still not what I needed, but I can love and respect that they did their best.
Yeah.
And their best was still not what I needed.
Yeah.
Their best was still harmful. And that is such a keystone to my personal healing.
Yes. And like, it's been easier for me in the homeschooling area, but like the hardest it has been is like the IFB teachings and practices. They subjected me and my brothers to. That's been difficult. And honestly, like co-education has probably been the thing that has made me have the most compassion for them, like learning about coercive control, and then thinking from their perspective, them being told, oh yeah, if you don't do this to your child, they're going to go on a destructive path. They're going to run their life. Satan's going to get them, and they're probably going to go to hell. So that's really terrifying. So you're going to want to protect your child from that and do anything. And again, it's so hard for me to hold those two things. Oh, they were doing what they were believed was going to help me, but it was so harmful and even abusive at times. It's tough. It's tough.
Well, that's part of the deconstruction, is trying to deconstruct the black and white thinking that's one of the elements of the BITE model. I know we keep referencing the BITE model, and it is important to know because this is a Pride Month episode that the Stephen Hassan, who came up with the BITE model, he is a bit of a turf, and he went on a whole thing defending J.K. Rowling, which we're not about. But the BITE model is very useful.
Yeah, I know. I recently saw that. I was like, ooh.
That one hurt a little bit.
You know, this is going to be the one that gets me canceled, but that it goes to show that even very smart people who are incredibly educated about coercive control and cult thinking can still fall down a rabbit hole of cult thinking.
No, I know. And I constantly have to be taking personal inventory just from all of the stuff that we do on the show. I literally almost every single day I have to try to take personal inventory and try to think about what I think.
I completely agree, but it is so nice. You know, we were joking earlier about Andrew making us feel a little bit old because we are in that late millennial age.
But he's only 7 years younger than us.
Yeah, but there's a generation divide.
I believe that the millennial generation means you don't remember the Challenger explosion, but you remember 9/11. Maybe it's different for the IFB where the generation shift is, do you remember when Jack Hyles died?
Yeah, and that was in 2001, which I very much remember, and Andrew would not. But I think it's great that this is really high level deconstruction, what you were just talking about, fighting black and white thinking within ourselves and believing that two things can be true at the same time. I was just starting that 7 years ago. So I left Hyles-Anderson in 2013. And then I left Pensacola in early 2015. So I would have been 22 around that time. And I was just getting a handle on that. I'm so glad that you're ahead of where I was.
Yeah.
It's really nice to see, and I'm so happy for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of people have said that. And what I've said to people, Gen Z's, strength is the information we have access to because of the internet. And that is the thing that is the biggest threat to all of these cults. Information control is part of the BITE model, and cults try their best to control information. That's what my parents did. We could not have anything that went against IFB teachings, especially around education. And they were so strongly against public education and advocated for homeschooling or an IFB Christian school. So being able to access that information, it's been so empowering and healing, and has been crucial in fighting that black and white thinking and getting through that indoctrination.
Absolutely. So were your parents the kind of homeschoolers and fundamentalists that believed if their kid didn't know anything about not being cis and het, if their kid didn't have information about being LGBTQ, that they wouldn't end up becoming LGBTQs? Was that their tactic?
That was exactly their tactic, and it didn't work.
It didn't work on me either.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, oh, still gay, and did not have exposure to any of this at all. And yeah, that was their view on it. Just if they don't have these ideas at all, then it's not possible for them to be this way, because Satan gets people through these ideas. It can't be inherent inside of them. We have to protect what enters into them. So
Right.
that was their view of that.
Probably the biggest myth in fundamentalism about sexuality or gender identity. They really believe that if you're not exposed to these ideas from an external point, as a righteous kid growing up, you will never come up with them yourself. And it didn't work on me. It didn't work on you either. I remember I had a kind of backwards experience with this, because I had heard about gay men and I had heard about lesbians, and I knew I liked boys sometimes. So I knew I wasn't a lesbian, and I figured, great, I'm good. Whew, thank goodness. Devil hasn't gotten me yet. And then I realized around 20 that I was attracted to both men and women, people of all genders. And I I suddenly realized, oh, maybe this isn't everybody's experience. And I heard the word bisexual for the first time. And it was literally a light bulb moment. The first time I heard the word, it was like an arrow in my heart. That's you. So I was bi long before I had the words to talk about my experience or what I was feeling. Did you have that experience, or was your experience of finding out who you are different?
Yeah, it was quite a journey for me. So growing up, if LGBTQ people were talked about, it was always sodomites. I did not hear any, at least in my younger years, I did not hear like gay, lesbian. I heard either homosexual or sodomite. And so that sodomite specifically is such dehumanizing language. Is reducing a person to one thing and is seeing them as very evil and deserving of destruction. The Sodom and Gomorrah story, oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many times I heard that growing up. And, growing up, hearing that sodomites were only like completely evil, there was nothing good. And it was almost if it seemed like they were so much worse than other sinners or whatever. And for me, I never thought I was gay, and I found out really at 16 because growing up, like I didn't really have interest in girls. I really liked being around guys, and I like guys, and I had a crush on a guy in my Sunday school class, but like I didn't really see it as bad. You know what I mean? I didn't see myself as a sodomite, which I'm trying to use a language that I knew growing up, so I know it's kind of strange to use it, but so I'm like, oh, like I'm not this evil, awful person who wants to do this and deserve destruction. And, I, looking back, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't. But anyways, I didn't have the education to know what I was experiencing. Nothing could change that. And when I got older and I heard more and more about it, especially in like teen Sunday school, and just starting to realize, especially when the sexuality really, really started to kick in, everyone else seemed to go in this direction, and I did not. And it's funny, I told the story to a friend because I was told growing up, you would lust after girls, but we can overcome lust and sexual desires through the Holy Spirit. And I remember being in Sunday school and feeling like I'm such a good Christian because I didn't struggle with lusting after girls. Like, oh my gosh, the Holy Spirit is working through me. I am not struggling with lust after women at all. Like, God is so good and all this stuff. And like, he's working through me. And that's how I saw that in that time. And, when you're taught to hate a group of people, that they're bad and like God hates them, and I remember my parents saying, these people are bad. God destroyed, Sodom and Gomorrah because of this. And that, that's very serious. And believing that, and growing up as a kid, I had an extreme us versus them mindset towards anyone who believed differently. You're indoctrinated with that. I believed my neighbors were evil because they were Methodist. And I remember the kids coming over. I was like a 10-year-old kid waving my KJV Bible, telling them they're going to hell because they're not reading a KJV Bible. Like, I look back and I'm like, oh. No.
I used to witness to kids in the McDonald's play place. I would take my little tiny Soul Winners New Testament into the McDonald's play place and gather all the kids at the top so I could preach to them and get them all saved.
Yeah, like the indoctrination is just so ridiculous. And like, I'm able to give myself compassion that there are adults around me indoctrinating me into this mindset to be scared of other people and to see them as less than, as evil and bad, and not see them for their humanity because, our humanity is bad and evil. There's nothing good in us. We're taught growing up. That had such negative impact on me too. Just you're worthless, you're trash. There's nothing good in you. And I'm going off a little bit. What was our subject on?
Well, so you have this disconnect between who you're discovering that you are, these parts of yourself that you're finding, and what you've been told by the church about all LGBTQ people. They're all enemies of God and God hates them and they're awful, terrible. And you know that you're certainly not trying to be awful and terrible and an enemy of God. You know that you are, you believe that you're more than that. So that's a disconnect as you're heading into end of high school, going to college.
Yes. And so I first want to go a little back to my teen years, because this is also a core memory that really impacted me. So in the 6th grade Sunday school class, it was a class right before you went into the teen Sunday school, and you would be in the teen Sunday school from 7th grade in this one class all the way until you graduate high school. And because growing up, it was each year you had a different teacher. And then for the teen years, you just have one teacher, one class to prepare you. It was, I don't know, it's interesting. And in this 6th grade class, this teacher was so hell-bent on just scaring all of us. You know, I never had any sex education growing up. I never had the talk. Like, actually, I'm about to get explicit. I'm not going to.
No, you can. We can. I mean, we can always chop it for Patreon. If
we can
want.
always bleep it. You know what Gabi said about Chris Collins that one time.
Yeah. So like, I
regret that joke a little bit. That was mean. She's unwell.
Oh no. Oof. Yeah, it happens. It happens to the best of us. But like, I had no idea. Like when I started having like omissions, like overnight and waking up, I was like, I have no idea what is going on. And I talked to, like, when I finally went to the doctor and he had to tell me about it, it was just really scary to me. There was just no education around it. And this Sunday school teacher, he told us that we would start having all of these desires from Satan, and Satan was hell-bent and he was going to try to get us the best he could in our teen years. So I'm interpreting all of my hormonal changes, my sexuality, these different urges as attacks of Satan and not human development. And so just being terrified of myself and just trying to pray away these natural things. And I was like a really like devoted fundamentalist Christian. I, read my Bible every day. I prayed constantly, like so much, trying to get God's forgiveness. And I took it very seriously. But it's such a burden trying to reach perfection, and you're living in fear and terror all the time, afraid of messing up because it will lead you down this awful path.
Was there a moment when you realized, like, oh, when they're talking about like sodomites and these people, that's me they're talking about?
Yeah. So really, there were urges of my sexuality growing up, and I wasn't sure what it was. But when it really hit me, I was 16 years old. So this was in 2016. And it happened at a youth conference at my church. And what really hit me was I started to form a crush on a guy at this youth conference, and I started to have those sexual desires about him. And I just did not understand it, because before it was just like romantic, emotional crushes that I didn't think it was a big deal. But when it got into really the sexual part, that part of me came out. I mean, yeah, it was really, really terrible, honestly. Like I hated myself so much. Like all those homophobic beliefs I had turned inward into internalized homophobia. And I believe that if I do not change my sexuality, God is going to destroy me.
Oh, that is so hard to hear, even, knowing that you're doing okay now. That's still heartbreaking to hear. Yeah. And I could say this 100 times, and I might say it 100 times, but every single story that we hear along this line reminds us that you cannot change your sexuality as a part of who you are. You cannot change it. Yeah. Your gender identity is a part of who you are. You are not going to be successful if you try to teach yourself or change yourself to something else. Because over and over again, it's kids like you and me who were the most devoted kids It's kids like you and me who believed everything and were highly literal and had thousands of Bible verses memorized probably, and were homeschooled, and your parents, quote unquote, did everything right by the IFB way of doing things. And it's kids like us that still end up being LGBTQ. It's kids that like us that still end up deconstructing, maybe because we took it all so literally.
Yeah, most definitely. And, for me, it seemed like there was a different standard for people who were sodomites because, IFB teachings, they can be so contradictory at times and so confusing. And then it feels like they really do move the goalpost with a lot of things too. And looking back, I was like, okay, we're taught that God can save us for our sins, but then, it's on people to pray the gay away or to try to change their sexuality. And looking back too, I'm like, oh, okay, well, God, and this is the term I heard, God can heal you from this. And I'm like, okay, well, why? Okay, so God cares enough to heal me from this, but Joe over here with cancer, sorry, doesn't really matter. That's something to me that I thought later. I'm like, oh, that doesn't really make sense.
Well, Joe obviously didn't ask in the right way, or ask enough times in a row, and wasn't reading the right passage in the Bible when he.
Or Joe's cancer wasn't caused by sin, except for when it was, because that's also a possibility, because this is the IFB.
And that's the horrible thing. There's so much shame and blame put on people, and they provide the answer to take it off of you, and they put it back on you, and they take it off. And that was something else that I've really understood a lot lately is growing up, the God I was taught growing up resembled an abuser. It was an abusive relationship, a narcissistic abusive relationship. And I had feelings of fear and terror, but also love at times for God. Like God was the one who loved me, but I was terrified of him. And I was so afraid of anything I did wrong. He was there waiting to hit me, strike me, punish me. And if I did anything, but
it's out of love.
But yes, exactly.
Because love presents in the form of abuse in this relationship with God that they portray.
Yes. And, the Chick tracts, as I really have tried to deconstruct and think about that, it really, I think one of them, I remember a picture of a TV screen, and God is replaying every single sin this person did in front of them. And that absolutely terrified me. I was like, God is watching everything I'm doing, and he's recording it, and he's going to replay it before me one day. And so I have to do my best to be perfect, because I don't want every single thought, action, sin replayed in front of me. It terrified me. It made me question my own thoughts, self-monitor, pray, just all these thoughts away, and just live in constant anxiety and just under that pressure. And then once the sexuality part came in, it was so much more intense because, oh my gosh, God hates this so much and he's going to kill me. And I just went into a deep, deep depression and a lot of just mental health issues just from, and disassociation, a lot of trauma responses from these toxic teachings that just turned me, we're already taught to hate ourselves in general. But I feel like when you're gay, they do it on such a deeper level, and it just reaches to the core of your just humanity. And it's devastating. It's abusive. It's just, it's so, so horrific.
So I have a question for you. This is a speculative question. I just want your opinion. Do you think that the IFB do that, instill such a hatred for any LGBTQ people in their children? Do you think that they do that with no knowledge that some of their kids are going to turn out gay? Does it occur to them that they're teaching some of their kids to hate themselves? Or do they really think that no IFB kid would ever turn out gay unless they were sinful and let Satan take them over?
Yeah, I would say, with my parents, and I would say in my opinion too, is they don't think that it would ever come naturally in a child at all. And if that child does turn out to be that, oh, it's their lifestyle choice. Oh,
Yeah.
they made that decision. It's very black and white. And it's interesting because this is something I haven't really talked about on interviews, but I think my dad sensed that. I don't know how he would have exactly seen it, but he at least saw me as effeminate growing up, and he really hated that. And my dad was just really, really cruel to me a lot growing up, trying to make me or fit into this gender role that I wasn't fitting really well at all, and that I was supposed to fit well if I was really saved. And I'm just, oh my gosh. But yeah, he was really harsh to me a lot growing up, and I've even talked to my little brother about this recently. He's like, dad was really awful to you. Like, he was so controlling to the point of, like, I would be at the dinner table and he would watch me and he would count how many times I chewed, and he would tell me how many times I chewed, and he would watch me and chew until I chewed how many times. He would start. It was just horrible, the control. And
oh my goodness.
Yeah. And Steven's like, he's like, it's a miracle you don't have an eating disorder, because that's horrible. That is so bad. And him trying to force me to do sports, and there was so much shame around me not wanting to do sports. Like, there was something wrong with me. Like, I remember hearing the disappointment in my parents' voice of, well, why don't you like to do these things that other boys like to do? Why do you like crafts and playing with clay? Because your child is gay. That's why.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with your kid. No, I have so been there, done that. And I think it's important to point out, when we're talking about sexuality and gender within the IFB, when we're talking about deconstructing that, one thing I think it's important for both those of us who are queer kids who grew up in the IFB and those who are our allies to understand is that sexuality and gender are very connected in the IFB, and gender roles are inherent to their understanding of gender. When the IFB talk about gender, it is your body parts and the stuff that you do. It is completely divorced from feelings or presentation or other things that we might associate with a person's internal sense of gender out here in the real world. In the IFB, it is what body parts do you have and what role do you play? And those things obviously must always match.
Yes.
So, and when we talk about IFB discrimination against trans people, I think that's an important thing to have as a baseline to understand. When you need to understand where the IFB is coming from and just how tied up sexuality and gender are with these incredibly prescriptive, strict gender roles in the IFB.
Yeah, and there's so much fear around if you don't fit that black and white role. Like, you're going against God, you're going against his design, and that is going to lead to a horrible path of destruction and pain. And God has one way for everything, and the IFB has the answer to that, apparently. And everyone has to follow it. And if they don't, then our country is on a horrible path, and everything. We're going to be judged as a nation. I remember hearing that so much that if we don't, I remember them saying, if we do not get our way in the government, these teachings, God is going to destroy our country, and we have to save our country through getting this into our government and voting in favor of that.
I was there when Scott preached America, America, and gave me a lifetime fear of nuclear warfare. Did you feel... So growing up as an AFAB child in the IFB, there were very, very slim opportunities to maybe be a little bit of a tomboy. It was okay if you learned how to change your own tire, because what if your husband couldn't make it to help you change your tire? It was okay if you learned, a little bit of home maintenance, because what if your husband was busy? It just makes you a better wife. Were there any little loopholes like that in like male gender performance for you?
Yeah, I don't remember any loopholes for us. No, not that I recall
wouldn't
right
think
now.
so. See, that's the thing. There are so many very, very, very bad things about growing up in the IFB as an AFAB child. But there are a couple little benefits, and that's one of them. Because I think the male gender role in the IFB is even more strict than the female gender role or the woman gender role in the IFB. Women have these little tiny workarounds, these little tiny avenues for self-expression. And men in the IFB do not. You do not get emotional expression. You do not get artistic expression. You do not get to slip on that role or that gender performance, even for an instant, because if you do, it is going to be bad for you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's such an interesting take on it. But yeah, I know I'm not going to speak for women at all, but yeah, there is so much of that pressure on men to just be so stoic and emotionless. And that's how my father was. Like, he was so authoritarian, so stoic, so emotionless. My mom would say growing up, she's like, yeah, your dad's a letter of the law kind of person. And she's like, I can't remember the other version. Is it love of the law? Was that the other?
Oh, spirit of the law.
Spirit of the law. That's what she's like. Yeah, she's like, I'm a spirit of the law kind of person. Spirit of the law people are a lot more fun than letter of the law people. She's like, we're great. But like this, I think that described both of their personalities really well. My dad was a letter of the law kind of person. My mother was a spirit of the law kind of person. And she did do her best to be as loving as she could. And my dad, like my heart does break for my dad at times because he did not know how to love. That is something I realized growing up as I really have unpacked why he was so cruel. He didn't know how to love at all. He was not in touch with his emotions. He was so cut off. And I think when you're cut off from love, like, that is so natural in us humans to have that love and connection. But I think IFB teachings really cut himself off from that. And that's something I've been trying to really unpack and get through, is it's cut me off from myself, from the people around me, and maybe even a spiritual connection to really something truly that's healthy. And like getting connected back with that is quite a journey.
Yeah, that was said so well. The IFB portrays so many human emotions and human behaviors as wicked and sinful and rebellion against God. And what it very easily leads to is a person who denies their humanity and tries to work themselves out of their humanity, work themselves out of having any human emotions or human behaviors, because that is seen as righteous.
Yeah, and I've really learned that Israeli cults, they don't want you to be in touch with your emotions. And if emotions do come up for you, you're taught a very specific lens with how to interpret your emotions. So, the emotional control of the BITE model. Oh, this is what this means. And this is the answer that you do to it. Here's this verse. You'll be fine. But, why are we not able to explore that and understand that? And, they don't want you to come to a conclusion that's different than the IFB because they have the truth and it's the only way. And like, once you start to question anything, even the most minuscule things, like, you are a threat in the IFB, you're a them.
And not in the non-binary respectful way, unfortunately.
Oh, sorry.
You're one of them.
Yes,
No,
sorry. I meant the us versus them thing.
I knew what you meant was clear. I'm just making a joke because
Thank you. I was like, oh shit.
No, I literally this week I had to explain a trigger warning. I'm going to quote one of those verses that gets all of us real bad. But I had to explain to a friend of mine what the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked means. Like, it means if you want something, if you desire something, it is probably a sin. If something makes you happy, it is probably a sin. And if you're convinced of something outside of scripture, you're probably wrong.
Man, that feels like Puritanism and Calvinism a little bit.
It's painful because you become an adult who has spent so much of their life denying reality and denying your humanity. You become an adult who has tried for the first 20 years of your life not to be human. And all of a sudden you're an adult and you have to figure out how to be human. It's really something.
Yeah.
Do we want to go to break now and then we can come back and talk deconstruction?
Yeah.
We talk about BJU, yeah.
Yeah, talk about BJU.
Amazing.
Okay, sounds
Yes.
good.
Hey, Sadie here. If this is your first time listening to the Leaving Eden podcast, make sure you go back and check out episode 57. It's a primer episode for new listeners. That episode tells my personal story and gives you all the terms and information that you'll need to know going forward. Also, check out our cult true crime series, The First Family of Fundamentalism, so that you can get the whole cult story. If you like our show, you can support us by joining our Patreon, where we have extended and uncensored episodes as well as other bonus content available. You can also join in the discussion in our Facebook group. That group is called Eden Exodus. Tell a friend, tell a family member, tell your worst enemy. The Leaving Eden podcast is a fully independent podcast, and we really appreciate your support. Now, back to the show.
We are back from our break. We are here with Andrew Pledger from Surviving BJU, a cult podcast. When you're like late teenager, 16, 17, you're understanding you're going to have to leave fundamentalism. But you decide to go to Bob Jones University.
Yeah, I know that. I've realized at 17 years old, I internally made the decision to leave fundamentalism, which is really hard to do. But the only language I had at that point for what I experienced at that point was spiritual abuse. People used religion, God, and these teachings and twisted them and used them to abuse and control me, mentally, emotionally. And in my mind, I could come to the place to say, this is harmful. This is toxic. I need to get out of this, but I can't tell my parents and I can't tell anyone. And oh yes, I'm gay and I'm still struggling with that internalized homophobia from that on lesser extents. And I want to leave, but I can't.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no way. This has been my entire world. And if I do leave, like who is going to care? And even terrified of the outside world, of all the terrible things that would happen to me if I left, because you're indoctrinated. I think Stephen Hassan calls it phobia indoctrination, where they keep you so scared of the outside world. It doesn't matter how bad things get on the inside, the outside world will always be worse and you'll never be happy. You'll go down this dark path and horrible things would happen. So you're safe as long as you're in the group and in this belief system. And, at that time, grappling still with the trauma from just the internalized homophobia, something like there's a lot I have held back on things I experienced growing up just because of the trauma from that. And I'm working on a memoir right now, trying to get that out and deal with the trauma of that. And so for me, I cannot leave. How do I leave? Well, okay, an education could be a way out, but the struggle with fundamentalist colleges is they're not accredited. And once you get their degree, you can only really get hired within their system or within their network. And I realized I have to get an accredited degree if I'm going to be able to get a job anywhere on the outside and get away from just this high control environment. And my parents, they were very picky about Christian colleges. So, they would not, I was only allowed to go to a fundamentalist college. They would not support me if I went anywhere else. I tried to get them to bend a little bit, like with the Regent University. But that was too liberal. Even like Liberty University was too liberal for them. And my options were basically Pensacola Christian College, Hyles-Anderson. And then I discovered Bob Jones University, which I had never heard of. Bob Jones University. It was a college my IFB church never promoted. It wasn't and I found out it's because they don't take the KJV only stance. So I heard of Bob Jones, the person growing up. my pastor would quote him, do right do right until the stars fall. That's one of Bob Jones Sr.'s famous quotes. And I heard my pastor, say that a lot growing up. So I only knew Bob Jones as a person. But when I heard of Bob Jones University, and then I found out it was accredited and they had a wide range of majors and career paths, it wasn't just strictly ministry based, and it was accredited. I then realized, okay, well, this is my way out, 4 more years, and I can leave this harmful and abusive environment. And there was actually a moment where I was afraid that even my parents were going to say no about Bob Jones. They thought they were KJV only, but when they found out they were not KJV only, they really started to be hesitant at first. And they were so scared about what people would think at our church that I was going to a Christian college that did not take the KJV only stance. My mom was just so frazzled by that. Oh, what are people going to say? What are they going to say? What are they going to say? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And my parents came to the conclusion that, okay, well, you're not going to be in the ministry. You're not doing that. But if you were, we would not let you go to Bob Jones University because they don't take the KJV only stance. But since you're not going on that path, we're okay with you going to Bob Jones. And here's the thing, I was still terrified of going to a Christian college in general. If I had a decision, really could decide, I probably wouldn't have gone to a Christian college. And it's interesting because I look at my journey and I still wouldn't go back and change that because a lot of things worked out despite being in that environment. So again, recognizing the good and the bad together, and that.
I find it a little bit, I don't want to say, it is a little ironic that Bob Jones University, you definitely describe it as a cult, but it also is a cult that's on your way out of a different cult.
I think it's really neat to have that foresight of this is my path out. The way that you spoke about how they prevent people from having a path out, I thought was really insightful. And I speak about this a lot. Usually when I talk about it, it is from the perspective of talking about misogyny in the IFB, because that's my lived experience. How girls and AFAB children are not educated and groomed to paint themselves into a corner and not have a path out of fundamentalism. But I'm really thankful to hear it from a different perspective as well, how your path was closed. Doors out of fundamentalism are boarded over. And if you want to find a door out, you got to get really, really creative. Like going to Bob Jones.
You do. Oh my God. Yeah.
So tell us about starting college at Bob Jones and what your experience was like there.
Yeah. So going to Bob Jones, I was terrified. I remember the day of freshman move-in, driving around the university, and a very iconic part of this school are the fence that surrounds the school. A lot of it's iron. I don't know if it looks like it's iron spikes, an iron spiked fence. And that is the cover of my limited podcast, Surviving Bob Jones University, that covers the school and survivor stories. I did that as the cover because it communicates to the people on the inside, they understand, and someone on the outside, they understand what that means. It really encapsulate how you feel in this environment. You're trapped in a prison-like environment, and just looking at that fence and seeing the spikes, just my heart just dropped that day of just how ominous it was. And, I was scared for my own safety. And my attitude going in was be quiet, follow the rules, don't cause any kind of uproar at all. Just do what you've always done. Conform, obey, pray, keep sweet, obey, pray. Yeah. And oh my gosh, at this point, I came to Bob Jones such a broken person, just such a shell of a person. And trying to grapple with my own past, only having the language of I experienced spiritual abuse. That's at that point, that's the only language I had for that. And it was also stressful because here I am growing up very isolated, being homeschooled, not having a ton of social interactions. I did have some growing up. We were in a 4-H group and a homeschool group, but still very limited social interaction. And now being thrown into this school environment where I'm around people all the time, like that was quite the switch. And, I was thankful I had the ability, or the strength at least, to go through that painful transition, because I wasn't, even my own mother, like she tried to kind of stop me from going to college because we had a codependent relationship, and that's a whole other podcast episode for another time. But we were very enmeshed. Like I was her emotional support system growing up because my dad could never be there for her at any point. So her emotional support system was leaving, and that was so much for her. But thankfully she was able to let me go on that journey. And at that point, I don't have my parents over me at all. And not having that really made me realize a lot about myself, that I conformed for love and acceptance so much. The more I conformed, the more my parents were loving and caring. The less I conformed, they would retract that expression of love. And so that internalized it as my worth is based on what I do, how much I can accomplish, how much I can look. And it's a heavy burden to carry. And, I think there were moments growing up I did feel that connection with some higher power, but then I question that because, oh my gosh, this is against what I'm told I'm supposed to feel in the IFB. I'm not supposed to feel this peace. I'm supposed to feel constant shame about who I am as a person. So it's again taught to distrust yourself, trust in the leaders telling you all these things. So, okay, so if anything goes against what they say, that's wrong. And I have to get rid of that. And I just lived in so much anxiety at Bob Jones of being found out for being gay, and really trying to still have my faith, but maybe try to see if there were good parts of it. But, I was only taught one perspective. I didn't know really how to search outside of that. And I feared other perspectives and other resources because that would lead me down a slippery slope. So there was that indoctrination.
So what was the environment at BJU? Did it feel more liberal than the environment that you grew up in? Did it feel any more gay affirming than the environment that you grew up in? Was there anybody who was safe there for you? Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because going to Bob Jones, I felt a bit more freedom because I did not have my parents monitoring everything I do. But I would soon learn and find out Bob Jones had their own way to enforce rules. And one of these ways was through a snitching culture, and it caused you to just not trust anyone. So if you see someone breaking a rule and you don't report it, and it's found out you didn't report it, you're just as guilty as that person who broke that rule or did that thing.
Ooh.
Yeah. So it creates this Scientology-like culture where you can't trust anyone. Everyone is an informant. And, if you say anything, like even against Bob Jones, like there's just so much judgment on that. There's so much loyalty to the school that is expected of you. And I remember even applying for the school, signing something saying, yeah, I'll never say anything bad about BJU in the press. I'll never talk to the press about Bob Jones University. And I look back on that and I'm like, whoa, major red flag there.
Was that legally binding? Are they gonna?
I assumed it was just. I don't think it was legally binding. I do not think it was legally binding. But I think if I Well, I did get kicked out, but anyways, we'll get into that. We'll get into that later. I did get kicked out. Well, anyways, we'll go into that later.
Oh, so this isn't actually Bob Jones isn't actually a cult. You're just a disgruntled former student who was let go for reasons completely unrelated to Bob Jones University being a cult.
Right.
You're trying to get back at the.
But anyway, sorry, I went off track. But so with Bob Jones and the culture there and my experience, there were certain points I felt some freedom, but the environment was still very oppressive. And I was actually followed by 2 staff off campus. Yeah.
Oh,
I was
Really?
followed off
that's a
campus.
PCC move.
Oh, yeah.
With that.
And the reason they thought I was suspicious because I would leave campus a lot during the day, and even at times at night, a few hours before curfew, and we get back, 30 minutes before curfew to be fine. Like I was making sure I followed within the rules. Like I was doing that, but because I left so much and I was leaving so much to get a breather from the culture of that place, just all the rules you had to follow. And when people give me shit all the time, if you didn't want to follow all these rules, you shouldn't have gone to Bob Jones, blah, blah, blah. And what I want to say is, for me, it's not about the rules at Bob Jones itself. It is about the system they put in place to enforce the rules, where you're hyper vigilant. You feel like you're always being watched, and it just creates these perfectionistic tendencies, and you have so much anxiety. And there's also unspoken rules at Bob Jones. And that's thankfully something I didn't experience, but I've talked to survivors where they're like, oh, they found something for me and they got me in trouble, but it wasn't even a rule. And then they made a new rule because of me, because of this. And it's just the goalposts are being moved. And when I got to Bob Jones, there was still the shame and the blame and just the utter worthlessness messages going on. And, and still, like, I didn't have my parents over me. And I knew how to break some rules. I knew how to get around listening to music and watching TV and not get in trouble for that. And we had a very busy schedule. We were required to be in discipleship groups. Those met at least 4 nights a week. We had to go to chapel, I think 4 days of the week. And then we all had to join a society, which met once a week, and different activities involved with that. We all had to attend church on Sundays from a BJU approved church list. And in addition, the indoctrination that's just being added into all of these classes. And, we're all college students, a lot of us having our own jobs too, just absolutely exhausted with this schedule and just all this indoctrination, and then just being made to feel like you're absolutely nothing. And I remember talking to someone at Bob Jones who never grew up in fundamentalism. And they were like, what is this? Like, I never experienced this growing up. Like, this is terrible. And I'm like, I grew up in fundamentalism. Welcome to my world. Like, it's horrible.
I'm just wondering how you would, if you never grew up in fundamentalism, how you would end up at Bob Jones University.
Because they do not advertise themselves as a fundamentalist university.
So they were just like a regular Christian.
They're just a non-denominational Christian, private Christian university.
Right. I knew a girl at Pensacola who was raised Presbyterian and not fundamentalist, not used to the rules and regulations. And she just wanted to go to an inexpensive Christian college for her STEM degree.
Oh my gosh, that poor girl.
That
Wow.
seems like such a, oh man.
She made it, she graduated, and her Instagram seems like she's doing okay. So I just hope for the best for her.
Yes.
I think I hope the worst thing she had to survive at Pensacola was being roommates with me when I was in a very rough frame of mind.
I mean, when there's no possible way, if you weren't raised IFB, that you would end up at like Hyles Anderson.
No.
But Bob, oh man, that's so just So if they were going to make up a new rule to specifically get you in trouble, what rule would that be?
Oof.
Like if they had to make up like an unwritten rule or like a
Yeah. I mean, I never experienced that myself, but I have talked to other people who have. And what I've talked to with other people, okay, so someone recently told me a story of, oh yes, when I was there was this rule, we had a coat and tie and like dress shirt. Okay, well, I'll have a dress shirt, a tie, I'm gonna put a sweater over that, and then I'm gonna have a dress coat on. And they were like kind of like playing with the rules. So now after they got in trouble, a new rule made, oh yes, you cannot put anything over your dress shirt and your tie. Like they had to be, and they did it to irritate them, to make them be very like granular about it, so specific and get so ridiculous with it. So
An anti-sweater rule. Man, I think you can even wear a sweater vest at Hyles Anderson. That is wild.
And like, you know, now like I wore sweaters at Bob Jones, they allowed it, and honestly that rule was gone by the time I was there. Like I would, the rule was you had to have a collared shirt on for guys, collared dress shirt or some kind of collared thing, or like polo, and always tucked in, no jeans, khakis, or dress pants. And so what I did, I would like, okay, I'll have a white dress shirt on, I'll put my sweater over it. And like we weren't required to wear ties at that time. Like what I want to emphasize is by the time I got there, they did lax on rules. And a lot of people give me shit like, oh, you have no idea what we fucking dealt with, all this stuff. And something I want to tell people is, okay, fine. They loosened some of the rules, but the snitching culture and the fear is still there. No matter how they've changed the rules, that's always stayed the same.
Well, yeah. See, I would say, and I guess I have done that to modern Hyles Anderson kids, you know, a little poking and prodding about the dress code.
They don't even have the hosiery rules anymore. These kids are soft. They're weak.
Just drives me insane. But you are absolutely right that I'm, you know, a little teasing about it is one thing, but the culture of fear, the snitching culture is absolutely still traumatic. And when a college like Bob Jones or Hyles Anderson loosens the dress code rules a tiny bit, that is a trick. They are doing that so that they can indoctrinate more people into their culture of fear and into that snitching culture. So if somebody like me who was at a fundamentalist school a little bit earlier than somebody like you was, says, oh, you're soft, or, oh, you don't know what I dealt with at this college, we can fall into the trick that it is a trap. It's a trap that is set by Bob Jones or Hyles Anderson to make them seem more reasonable now. And I don't want to fall into that trap when I'm talking about kids who were there after I was.
That I love that. I've never thought of that or heard that perspective, but I agree with you 100% on that. And what it does is it keeps people or survivors fighting about their own experiences instead of focusing on dealing with the issue, the university or this culture.
Yes. And I will joke with anybody about there is definitely a line in the sand between people who had to wear hosiery at Christian college and people who did not. And I will joke about it all day long, but I want to be really careful to acknowledge that your trauma is the same. I was, you know, just slightly more uncomfortable than people 10 years younger than me going through the same trauma.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that came up. How bad was, I would say, like explicit homophobia? So you talked about lots and lots of sermons growing up that were homophobic. Was it just as bad at Bob Jones? Were you hearing that from the pulpit?
Oh, yes. And they had a special conference addressing just sexuality and gender while I was there.
Oh, you were there for that. Oh, man.
Yeah. And
I've read about this.
And we even covered it in our devotional books, our discipleship books, because every semester we would be given a specially crafted, cult-made indoctrination book written by the president that would cover the themes in chapel of the sermons. And, you know, one of them entailed, you know, sexuality and gender. And it was so awkward being in discipleship groups discussing this, hearing them say, why are they here? Why are gay people here? Like, I see them around. I can tell. And it just, I don't understand. So there was a lot of fear around it, a lot of judgment. And I noticed though, they have kind of shifted a tad. It's like, oh, well, we need to have compassion for someone who has same-sex attraction. They can't help that. But through God, they can overcome that, and we need to have compassion, help them to overcome that and, be restored or healed. There was still a lot of judgment and shame about it though. And like, oh yes, we'll be compassionate here, but still they're awful and terrible and on a path of destruction, and they're this and they're that.
So you just said in discipleship group, somebody said, oh, I see gay people around campus. I know that they're here. Is that accurate? Were there other LGBTQ students? And did you know who they were?
Yeah. So I was in the art department. So, of course, I knew that there were other queer people, and I could tell too. But I never revealed my own sexuality to people, because there are gay people in fundamentalism who are indoctrinated that I can fight this or I can overcome this. And my fear was, if I reveal this to someone and they are in conversion therapy or something, they're going to say, oh, this person came out and they're not fighting this, or they've accepted it. They need to be saved, like I'm trying to do, saved from this. So again, not knowing who to trust.
That is such a real and danger.
Yeah.
So even being yourself, talking about a part of who you are, is so dangerous.
Yeah. And it was really difficult, because my freshman year, my assistant discipleship group leader did realize that I was gay, and that was really hard to like navigate that. And the funny thing was, I ended up having this huge crush on him, and I was like, Andrew, I'm like, you can't do this. This cannot happen. You cannot. And so I did everything I could to avoid him at all, or any interaction, or like, he's sitting on that side of the room, I'm on the other. I'm not making eye contact. Like, he doesn't exist. And it was like one night, oh my God. It was we were having a discipleship group meeting in his room, and the bell rang. We all had to leave our rooms and go meet with our group. And I see all the guys, I don't know, in our group in the room. And then like, he's undressing in the corner, and I just accidentally just like glance, and I'm like, oh shit, like, nope. I'm like, we're leaving. And we made eye contact as I moved away. And I was like, okay, like maybe he thinks I was just walking in the room, and that was like, it was technically an accident. I'm like, what is he doing? Like, he shouldn't make me stumble. Like,
the rules on this are very clear. It's not your fault if he caused you to stumble.
He knows it's a discipleship group time. You shouldn't be changing like his like. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry.
Oh, the inappropriate. He caused you. Yeah, that clearly was not your fault. He caused you to stumble. But that is absolutely correct. Oh, the inappropriate queer crushes of fundamentalism. Oh, the stories I can tell from Pensacola.
And after that moment, I think he wanted to like test out or see. And one thing he did, I don't know if he did this because of me, but he put pressure on all of us guys at the end of freshman year to have girlfriends. He's like, every single one of you have to have girlfriends by the end of freshman year. And each week they would ask each guy about a girl they had a crush on. And I would make up a fake person. And I'm such a terrible liar. Like, I cannot lie. And like, he knew I was lying through my teeth. And I laugh, because I'm like, why would you make up a person that obviously does not exist at all? Like, oh my God.
She goes to school in Canada. She's not. I met her at summer camp. I promise she's real.
Well, if it wasn't this like horrible snitching culture, you could have found, some girl who would have just gone along with it.
Yeah.
Because I
And-
know that was absolutely a thing at Pensacola for like fine art stuff that you were expected to have a date to. There were ways of communicating, and you
yeah.
would just find
Yeah.
somebody to pair
So
up with.
so this guy, yeah. So anyway, so that crush intensified like a lot, and he tried to like. It was only one instance. He tried to like kind of push boundaries, with that a bit. And anyways, I don't even want. It's so weird, but I don't even want to get into that story right now. But anyways, he.
Can you share
Like,
any of like the names of fake crushes that you made up?
I wouldn't even. I would say that. Oh, I don't know their name. I see them around campus, and I'm very attracted. Because that sounds so natural. Yeah, that's how you talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm thinking of the scene in like 40-Year-Old Virgin when they're in the back of the he's talking about it's like grabbing a bag of sand.
Oh my gosh! But yeah, so it was difficult. Yeah, dealing with that. And the thing is, it was interesting because that guy, he knew I had a crush on him, and he loved it. He loved it. He wasn't really scared of that. I think he knew that I was still terrified of my own sexuality and not knowing what to do with it, and he loved that I liked him that much. But that was interesting. But yeah, after that year, I mean, freshman year that was probably my worst year at Bob Jones University. Like, I went through a lot of like dark mental health issues, and was thankfully able to find help on the outside, like my interaction with the outside. Long story short, I meet this family at this very liberal church, and they happen to live near Bob Jones, and they basically take me in, and they become my safe haven, and I'm able to they gave me a key to their house, and I would go to their house during the day at times to get away from Bob Jones. And
Oh.
I'm sorry, what, Sadie?
Oh, I just said, wow, that is so kind. I'm so
Oh.
thankful that you had that.
Yeah, like I mean, I try not to be dramatic. I know gays can be so dramatic. But
It's okay. We welcome that here.
yeah. But really, like, they really saved my life. Like, I genuinely, like, I would not be here if I would have never met them. And I am forever grateful for them for that. They gave me like that genuine love without any expectation of anything. I didn't have to be anything. They just loved me for me, and it's amazing. I was just at their house yesterday celebrating Cinco de Mayo. So I'm so close to them and see them, and we're in contact. But just experiencing love by someone who does not conform to fundamentalism, that
Mhm.
made that cognitive dissonance. Like, no, they're supposed to be evil. They're supposed to be bad. They can't have love in their hearts. So having that good experience with someone on the outside really like made me question fundamentalism's approach to the outside world and their view on humanity themselves. And so yeah, here I am on this journey, questioning because of that, dealing with my sexuality in this culture, dealing with a lot of mental health issues because of what I realized would be later my struggles with religious trauma and just trauma from my upbringing in general. Like, I still had several breakdowns at Bob Jones University. Like, oh my gosh, it was just soul crushing.
I think that's such an important message for LGBTQ kids who are still on the inside, for deconstructing kids who are still on the inside. There was somebody who was there for you. There was somebody who was just ready and waiting to love you and step in your life in this incredible way. And I've experienced that. I've experienced many times in my life, there was somebody there who was ready to step in a way that I would never have expected and could never have even asked for. But there have been so many people in difficult times throughout my life that were ready to do that. And I think what I want to always say to those who are still inside, to people who are deconstructing or LGBTQ and still within the IFB or a high control group, is those people are out there, out here. There are people who are so kind and so loving. And it is not something you've culturally experienced if you're in the IFB or in some of these other high control groups. But there are really, really good people out here who will help you in ways that you cannot imagine out of the goodness of their own heart. And you're told that those people don't exist because that is one way that the doors are boarded up where you cannot escape. It's not that everybody in the real world has good intentions or everyone is safe or everyone is trustworthy, but those safe people absolutely exist.
Yeah, they absolutely do.
So tell us about the end of your time at Bob Jones.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, through my struggle with my own mental health and fundamentalism, I could not, at least at that point in my journey, love and abuse was so intertwined. And I decided to leave fundamentalism completely and just like remove myself from all of it. And I wanted to leave it because it was abusive. It was harmful to me. It was slowly killing me. And, you know, I publicly left fundamentalism after making a photography project on religious trauma and how it looked throughout all of my life and emotionally expressing that. That happened in early 2022. I would
So
say
you did this as like a school project?
It was a secret school project I was doing.
gutsy.
Wow. That's kind of badass. I love that.
Yeah. So, and
Wow.
how I publicly left fundamentalism was I was interviewed by Joshua Harris on his Instagram Live. Yes, the Kiss Saying Goodbye author. Yes.
Yeah, we're familiar.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know y'all did an episode on him, and like everyone in fundamentalism and just purity culture knows him. But he was interviewing people like deconstructing or grappling with their experiences, and he's like, yeah, come on, I would love to interview you. And so I talked about what I had processed of my journey at that point, you know, the impact of fundamentalism, and then sharing my photography series. And before that happened, I blocked so many people so they wouldn't see it, at least Bob Jones, but that didn't work. And when I got back, and this is my senior year, and this is my last semester at Bob Jones University, and I had already heard from someone, they're like, yeah, everyone is sharing this interview around campus. I just wanted to let you know.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh, well, I mean, it was a risk I was willing to take. It was something I felt really led to do. And 2 weeks went by after the interview. I heard nothing. And I'm like, what? I'm like, 2 weeks and I've heard nothing? Nothing about, okay. I'm like, whatever. And then one night, and before this night happened of my expulsion, the people that took me in, I call them my guardians. They called me. They're like, we saw the interview, and you can come and live with us if you get expelled. Like, you have that safety net. And I'm like, oh, thank you so much. I'm like, I think it'll be fine. It's been 2 weeks already. They haven't said anything. And then a few days later, I'm basically, my dorm supervisor, who doesn't even know who I am, is like, you're Andrew Pledger. I'm like, are you? He's like, are you Andrew Pledger? And I said, yes, I'm Andrew Pledger. He's like, we have a meeting right now.
Oh.
Downstairs, 2 staff are coming. And part of my story that I skipped over was I did some like discipleship thing with someone that turned into conversion therapy. That's a whole other area. But that person was going to be in the room, and I had ended that the relationship or whatever, that situation a while ago, and hadn't talked to him since. And that was kind of re-traumatizing, being in the presence of that person again. But I was basically like, yeah, I was expelled. They never brought up my sexuality because that's when I came out. I came out of the closet to share the horrible impact and trauma that I experienced because of these teachings, because of that IFB. And some of the worst of it, I haven't even shared yet. And I'm still trying to get to the place in my book where I can actually get to that point to share that. But they're like, you're out. Like, we don't want you here anymore, basically.
Wow.
You know, my very last semester. And, you know, I was okay with it because my entire life was written out for me. It was planned for me. It was controlled. But this was me for the first time saying, I'm taking the pen and the paper, I'm writing my story. If it's messy, whatever, but it's mine and I can call it mine, and I'm claiming my autonomy. I'm claiming my agency, and I believe everything's going to be fine from that point on.
I love that. That's inspiring. I think that's there is a lot to learn from your story, because having that kind of bravery is so difficult for someone like you or me, who was indoctrinated with this perfectionism, who was taught to be a good boy, taught to be a good girl, and you were raised in church and you do things exactly right. And breaking free from that is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It also goes to show that part of you feeling safe to do that was you had somewhere to go.
Yeah.
And that people like we are now can help other
Yes.
people get out. Not everybody is capable of giving someone a place to stay, but we can give people the crucial support that allows them to be brave and stand up for themselves and leave that
Yeah.
kind of scenario.
Yeah. And that's what's really inspired me to create the Surviving Bob Jones University podcast, which that is out and it's done. And I thought after I made that podcast that me digging into Bob Jones, it would be over. But after the release of the limited series, I had like 40 people who wanted to share their story.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. And I kept saying, I'm sorry, the Surviving BJU podcast is done. But after so many messages, I decided, all right, I'm just going to create another podcast that's just about Bob Jones. And it's not a documentary style like the limited series is, where it's several stories per episode with history and different things involved. It's going to be interview based, really, and just for survivors, to give them that space to tell their story, to give them that. And, and really, I've given that space for other people, because when Josh let me on his show, that was the first time that someone they saw me, they heard me, they understood me for the first time, and accepted me for my humanity and my pain. And I want to do that for other people. And I want other people to know that they're not alone, because these environments, they tell us it's your fault. You're not believing enough. You're not trusting enough. Or, oh, you're the only one really experiencing this. This is working for the rest of us, but it's just you. So it's me saying, no, it's not just me. It's a lot of other people. And this system of control is inherently abusive and toxic. And I'm going to speak up. Other survivors are going to speak up. We're going to hold this institution accountable. So that's why I created my new podcast, which is out now. It's called Beyond BJU, Exposing Fundamentalism. And it's exposing the damage, that Bob Jones University has done at that school itself, but also the damage and the influence that it has across fundamentalism in general. Like, I recently learned on my new podcast that Bob Jones has had influence on the top 3 homeschooling curriculums in America. Bob Jones University has also produced grads that have caused a lot of harm. Peter Ruckman, I know y'all did something
Yeah.
on
We know
him.
Peter Ruckman.
I'm sitting here next to my whole bookshelf of Ruckman books that I
Yeah.
haven't even gotten to yet.
He graduated from Bob Jones University. Tim
Yep.
LaHaye, who created the
Yep.
Left Behind series, he graduated from Bob Jones University. So what I think is so important for people to understand is when we look at these leaders, these specific abusive leaders, we need to understand where they learn these techniques. We need to go back to the leaders of these movements, the colleges they were trained at, and really understand what is going on here. Because, I've discovered, okay, the IFB is making a lot more sense as I understand Jack Hyles. It's making me understand my dad and my parents a lot more. You have any group, they're going to be just like their leader, whether it's a good or bad group. That's just how groups kind of work. You model the leader. And so going back to Bob Jones Sr. and understanding him and why his followers are the way they are, and deconstructing that and being like, okay, we were taught these things as truth and as the only interpretation, but maybe there's a different way to see this or to unpack this. And I've learned through this podcast that these leaders have just weaponized religion and scripture to prioritize their power and control and to protect themselves from any accountability at all, and just exploiting people for labor and money and sex, just all these different things, just using that as a tool. And, I'm hoping that really people can feel seen, heard, and understood when they listen to my podcast, Beyond BJU. And what I'm excited about my podcast is a lot of these survivors, they're telling their stories for the very first time. Like, they've never said it before. So I'm being very careful. I'm doing pre-interviews with people to make sure they're ready. I'm treating each episode with just so much care, and just so much is coming to light. I'm really excited about my podcast, Beyond BJU, because I'm doing a 4-episode expose on the Wilds Christian Camp. And I don't know if y'all have heard of the Wilds.
I have.
This is a Bob Jones affiliated Christian camp. It was started by a Bob Jones grad, Ken Hayes, and a survivor came forward and they were in all of it, like every part of it. And I usually don't get shocked by things in fundamentalism, but this, what she went through has just really shocked me and horrified me as some of the things. And some of it still is not surprising to me, but it's still shocking, if that makes sense. It's just like,
absolutely.
So it's just horrific. And I'm excited to bring these stories to light. And yeah, I hope that people will listen to the podcast and support survivors through their journeys.
I'm so excited to hear that. And thank you so much for being on with us today. When you finish your book, by all means, consider this an open invitation to come back and promote that. The last question that I had for you was, what are some things that have helped in your journey of deconstructing internalized homophobia?
Yeah, I think for me, kind of exposure to positive exposure to positive representations of queer relationships and people, and positive interactions with queer people, and understanding. And it takes time. It's so ingrained, that internalized homophobia. I still deal with it sometimes. It's not as intense as it was in the past.
Of course, yes.
And it's just learning that self-compassion for myself. And you have to get outside of that black and white thinking, and exposing myself to information about sexuality. And even for me, understanding how, a lot of people have weaponized scripture to be against LGBTQ people, when a lot of the things have been taken out of context, and it's just not meant for what we've been told that it means. And I know some people don't care about that at all. I didn't care about that at a certain point in my journey, but that's something I have kind of looked more into now. But really getting to that place, it takes time. Healing takes time. And so for me, understanding I don't have to be perfect, and that is okay, and laying that pressure off, and it's okay to love myself. I don't have to hate myself. And it's something I'm still working through. But yeah, I would encourage people that burden should not be placed on you. You should not have to hate yourself for that. So that part of your humanity, and it's not bad, and it's not wrong, and you are a good person. And I hope people can learn that about themselves.
That's really beautiful. I think I'm still working on all of those things as I'm coming up on 10 years of living fundamentalism.
And it's still a struggle.
And a lot of that is still very much on my to-do list, things that I am working with every day. But I'm so thankful for the journey I've been on. And I'm so thankful that to hear your story, which has echoed my experiences in a lot of ways. I'm so thankful that you're speaking out to the people who are following us on that journey, and letting them know that there's a great, big, wonderful world out here. That was really beautifully said.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all again for having me on.
Thank you for coming. This has been such a... I'm really impressed with everything that you've told me. I just gotta say, that story about the art project for school, That
Yeah.
man, I give you mad props for that.
Thank you.
That really impressed me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on, Andrew.
Oh, of course. Thank y'all so much for having me.
Yeah, you have a great day.
Happy
Awesome.
Pride.
Yeah, happy Pride.
But
But old rolling river of time, you've healed me in too many days. No regrets, no confusion, there'll be no pollution. I'm so thankful I've decided to change my ways. I'm so thankful I decided